Hello, Easton, and welcome to the Rabbi's Roundtable. I'm Rabbi Peter Hyman, Rabbi at Temple B'nai Israel, and my guest today is Reverend Leonard E. Palmer, Sr. Reverend Palmer is the pastor at Union United Methodist Church in Wharton, Maryland. Thank you for being here. Okay. Just so you'll know, this show is going to be a little different. We are going to focus on Buffalo and the tragedy there, and also discuss and look at the whole question of systemic racism. I'm not happy that we have to do this, but I think it's important and necessary, and we need to address what needs to be addressed. And before we get into our conversation, I just want to, and I don't do this very often, but you'll allow me to be pastoral and rabbinic. I think the most important statement in all of Torah, in all of the 5 books of the Bible, comes out of Genesis, where we are told that God tells us, human beings, that we are made in the image of God. Okay? That should inform the approach to other human beings for all of us. Sadly, it doesn't. And as a fan of Shakespeare, I have always been moved, for a number of reasons, by Shylock's soliloquy, and where he talks about, in The Merchant of Venice, Shylock says, "He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains." But then he says, "Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions." And I've always thought that was one of the more brilliant, Shakespeare's brilliant, and I recognize this, but one of the more brilliant soliloquies, because, again, this speaks to the commonality of human beings. And Shakespeare wrote it at a time when that was maybe even worse then than it is today.
Indeed.
We do want to talk about the tragedy, the senselessness, and the systemic racism. So, Len, thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for the invitation.
And, you heard my introduction.
Yes.
What do we do? How do we, and I say this, I'm frustrated, and I know our viewers aren't used to seeing me and hearing this tone in my voice, but I really am frustrated. We need to do something to ameliorate our society, to make people see the connection and not the differences. And
traditionally here in this world, they've seen the connection, but there's been a trump card, and that's been capitalism. It's been about money, profit, and if in order for me to get ahead, in order for me to have what I want, then that means that I have to be able to keep you from getting it too. And that othering so that I can be has been the situation. And if you recall, even when it came to Egypt, they said that there was a pharaoh who came to power that did not know Joseph. Right. And he looked around and he saw all, and he said, if they connect with our enemies, and they'll rule, overthrow us. So it's a fear of loss of power, and as it was said by the shooter in Buffalo, it was a fear that we will be replaced as the power seat and the economic ambassadors.
What bothers me, and Reverend Palmer was referencing the beginning of Exodus, and I always say that those are the 6 most frightening words in all of the book of Exodus. There arose a new king over, 9 words. There arose a new king over Egypt who knew not Joseph. And with that you're right, history changes. But it seems to me that the promise of America and what you just articulated correctly are in conflict, are in collision. The promise of America is, at least as I understood it, and maybe I'm not seeing it in the same way you do, but the promise of America is that we have access to this, that we have the opportunity, that we have the ability.
To a degree. But you remember how America was founded.
Yeah.
America was founded, and it said that all men were created equal. But then they looked and said, but wait a minute.
Right.
There's all these people of color
Yeah.
in the South. And we can allow them to count, then the South will have more power than the North. So we now have to regulate them to 3/5 of a person. So again, it's about that replacement. Yeah. So it's already embedded in America's history.
You're right. It's frightening, actually, and it always boils down to politics and control.
Yes, sir.
Always about who gets to say to whom what. And I think as we look at what happened, as we listen to the rhetoric, and the shooter, you can say what you want, but the fact that these ideologies, these principles, this craziness is online, and people are becoming more and more exposed, I think it says that we have a responsibility as a sane society to be responsive to that. Replacement, when they were marching in
Charlottesville, yes.
Yeah, and saying, Jews will not replace us.
Yeah. But it was actually two phrases they were saying.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, Jews will not replace us, and you will not replace us. Which just makes it kind of funny because both of those people, those ideologies are represented right here.
Of course. Give me a break.
So that theory, I never understood. It's because they're afraid that they're losing their country. So you've already said others don't belong. And so if America's promise is based on all men are created equal and that we all have an opportunity here in this country, then it should not be some people belong here and some people don't. If you figure if you came and you saw people that were already here, and you tried to basically annihilate, the Indians,
Native
Americans, when you look at what was done to them, and yet you hear people who don't look Native American saying, our country, we need to take back our country. So that theory of we and not and they is permeating in our society. And my question is that if this is a Christian Judeo foundation of the country was formed on Christian Judeo foundation and beliefs, then why do we not act like it? At what point do those beliefs come into play? They are quickly to talk about those beliefs when it comes to abortion rights. Oh, family, and you hear family values. But where is the values of a community and a country when it comes to everyone? Correct. And everyone having those opportunities?
What do we do? How I wrestle with this as a member of the clergy. What do I write in my articles? What do I write in my sermons and share with the congregation that they will pay attention to and take home and help elevate and ameliorate the society in which we live? I mean, you and I, we're clergy. We are. I don't mean this in a negative. We enjoy a certain reality, but our responsibility to maintain that reality is to engender the principles that were taught by God.
And that's true.
To to respect, to love one another. I think I did a sermon, and I said, what's the worst sin a person can commit? Okay? And I went down the whole list of things that are obvious. And I said, and actually, according to rabbinic literature, the worst sin a person can commit is to look in the face of another human being and not see the image of God on that face. Okay? And that has, I'm not a paragon of virtue, but that has always informed me, that has always moved me. And I you look at a person and you judge a person by how they act, what they do. Lots of people don't like fat people. Okay, I'll live with that. I'll go on a diet maybe one day. Again, but seriously, how do we get past this? And what does it say that so many folk are vulnerable and susceptible to this kind of ideology, replacement theory, and white supremacy?
Well, believe it or not, the Ku Klux Klan was considered a Christian organization.
Oh, I know that.
Right? And you just talked about how we as clergy, but it was clergy who were teaching the separatism and the supremacy in churches. And so we're dealing with a history of misguided foundations of beliefs. I mean, a lot of people who gravitate to the white supremacy theology are gravitating because they believe that they are better and called to be better, and anyone else who they encounter has to conform to them. But that's been in the church.
It's not just the church. It's Western religion, since Western religion became monotheistic, and I
agree.
Because
it was imported from Europe.
Well, and I always, in my Bible class, I teach a Bible class. Some of the viewers know. I always say that one of the dangerous things about Scripture is that it can be twisted and bent and manipulated in ways that it was never meant to be. Right? I'm grateful that my Hebrew ability is good. I can see what the original text says and not have to go through the eyes of a translator.
Right.
But still, I always, and I may have talked about this in another show, but one of my favorite lines in all of the New Testament, Matthew, where Jesus is talking to Peter, and he says, "Thou art Peter. Upon this rock I will build my church." And if you ask 99% of your parishioners, probably don't know what the next half of that verse is. And the next half is, "And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Okay? If you ask people to interpret that, they don't understand the initial original intent. It was a political statement. "Thou art Peter, upon this rock I will build my church." They weren't in Jerusalem when that was said. And the rock, if you go to Jerusalem, in the middle of the old city is a beautiful six-sided building, gold, called the Dome of the Rock. Right? That was, according to Jewish tradition, that's where Abraham was supposed to have the rock on which he put Isaac, and then, of course, in Muslim tradition, in Islamic tradition, that's the rock where Muhammad ascended into heaven, irrespective. And so the B part of the verse, "And the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." If you ask people, what are the gates of hell? They'll talk about hell and the devil. To this day, the old city, the wall around the old city of Jerusalem, has 6 gates. That was a political statement being said in response to what wasn't happening. Scripture is Scripture. So,
it is.
Yeah.
And you're right. One of my favorite movies is the Book of Eli. Denzel Washington.
Yeah.
And it's all about the search for the book. And that book is the Bible.
I know.
And the reason that the man is searching for the book is because when people hear those words, they are easily controlled. That was his reason. It's for his power. That's where he found, because he understood that, yeah, Scripture can be utilized in such a way.
Well, I always say that religion is about power, control, and economics. And religion is different than theology.
And that it is.
Right? Theology is about a relationship between a supreme being and an individual. Mm-hmm. Religion
is practices.
It's who's got the power and who can tell you, you can't eat shrimp or you can't eat meat on Friday or whatever.
Indeed.
It is what it is anyway.
Yeah. But it is those twistings that ingrain the othering. And the young gentleman, as he watched those videos, and I know his parents were engineers, so they were kind of, you figure they were middle class. Mm-hmm. Almost 80% of middle class attend some sort of religious institution.
Sure.
And so, again, where was that foundation of being able to see? Because even the Christian religion, for those who are following Christ, it says, how can you love God and hate the brother who you can see? Love God that you can't see, but hate the brother that you can see, then you can't.
Right.
So you should be able to see God in the face of each and every being.
That's correct.
Because we're all made in His image.
That's correct.
But he saw foreigners. He saw foreigners in his land. And Scripture also says, you were once foreigners in a strange land.
Oh.
So
that's the whole reason we celebrate Passover.
Right.
It says all the time, remember, and the great rabbinic principle is, remember what it feels like to be enslaved and do not enslave anybody else. Remember what it feels like to be oppressed. You damn well better not oppress anybody else.
Right.
Those are the important takeaways from Scripture, I think, anyway.
So the unfortunate thing is, I believe that it's all based on fear. When you look at the rabbinic theology, it's all based on love. Love of neighbor, love of God. Mm-hmm. When you look at the Christian theology, it's supposed to be all based on love. Mm-hmm. Love of neighbor, love of God. Mm-hmm. But when you look at America and what has happened, it's all based on fear. Be afraid that they're going to replace us. Be afraid that they're going to treat us the way that we've treated them if they come into power. Be afraid that they're going to be able to care for their family and you're not. When the jobs were taken from the power plants and the coal plants, steel plants, and all those things, it was not people of color who made those decisions.
Right.
But it was the people of color who they told was taking your job. Yeah, you got laid off because they got that job. And so it was an othering, basically, again, based on economics. As long as you're focused on those people over there, you're not paying attention to us who are the rich and the elite who have prospered in all this.
Interesting.
And they have people who are suffering, looking, understanding that they've been told all their life that these people are to be afraid of. Be afraid of the people of color. Be afraid of the Jews. Be afraid. And it's all centered on this thing that we name as whiteness. Before, when the Protestants came over, they were oppressed because they were Protestant. The Italians came over, they were oppressed because they were Italian. The Irish came over, they were oppressed because they were Irish. And then it became, oh no, but we're all white.
I served as the rabbi in Beaumont, Texas many years ago, for 13 years. And Beaumont, Texas is 90 miles east of Houston. And it's 3 miles, it's from Easton to St. Michael's is Beaumont to Vidor, Texas. And Vidor, Texas was the home of the Klan. Mm. And I was in the job maybe 3 weeks, and I get a letter, no return address, and I open it up, and it is this racist, anti-Semitic screed. It was really despicable. And he said, because there was an article about the new rabbi and all that, and he's go back where you belong, and then he goes, whoever wrote it, I obviously never knew, he talked about the Jews, he talked about African Americans, and then he talked about the Catholics. And I thought to myself, whoa, we're with the Catholics. We're coming up in the world, you know? But the point is, it was really sort of funny, but it's not. If you don't see the image of God on the face of the person next to you, we're never going to make any progress.
We're not.
And that's what worries me.
But in order to see the face of God, you've got to stop looking at others as others. Yeah. You got to look at human beings as human beings. And when we begin looking at each other as those of us who have been all created in the image of God, and we can begin seeing ourselves in one another and begin appreciating the differences instead of ostracizing those differences. I mean, when they read the manifesto of the shooter in Buffalo, he said, I wanted to instill fear and to those who are not white in this country, and hopefully they'll be afraid enough to leave the country. Where is the emphasis on instilling love? Where's the emphasis on unity
and respect?
And respect. Where's those emphasis? When we begin as people, and we're gonna. I'm a part of a organization called the Bay 100 Covenant Churches, and we have community conversations on race.
Conversation on race, sure.
And on the 20th of June, we're going to have one in regards to race and religion. And part of the question is what is the religious community's responsibility in helping to overcome the hate? Because if the epithos, the ethos of religion is about love, how can there be so much hate coming out of our churches after services?
It's the I mean, I do have an answer. That's the issue that collides under the frame of religion. Okay. You do it my way. See, I did an article recently on the evolution of polytheism, from polytheism to monotheism.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is, when I was researching it, once you go from a multiplicity of gods to an individual God, and I then say, this is the God, but those gods aren't, then you have a political power struggle.
Yeah. My God is better than you guys.
Yeah. Well, you know, and that's really, I think that's part of the issue here.
I can agree with that.
Now, what do we do as clergy to begin to prevent this? How do we get people to listen? How do we change minds?
We can't. I'm going to be honest with you.
Okay.
We can't. You see, our minds are, and our thought processes is basically based on our beliefs. So how do we help people to understand that just because what you believe does not, I mean, if you look at the Christian religion, the Jewish religion, and the Muslim religion, they all talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Sorry, yeah.
So we're all saying we all have the same foundation.
Commonality, yes.
And so why can't we begin with those commonalities? why is it that we can all agree that those were some of the examples of faith? And when you look at the examples of faith, when you look at them, they still, you don't see the hate. You see that when Abram was told to walk, he walked. And did he have servants? Yes. Did he end up having some slaves? Yes. Those slaves were treated as family, though. Matter of fact, he says, without sons, that my servant, my slave, is going to become the heir of my household. So even though there were people who were different.
Yeah.
And when God talked to him, he said, I want you to circumcise your whole family. And that meant the servants too. So everybody, the servants, the slaves, everybody was included in that covenant.
Correct.
And so why can't we stop looking and talking about what's different and realize that there's a commonality, and if that commonality is there in those three, then 9 times out of 10, that commonality has to be based on the God.
Mm-hmm.
And so why are we not really, in a sense, talk about the same God, but we've just decided we're going to take different perspectives on some of the things? And should those differences now make us enemies? Or should we focus on the commonality that makes us united, and then that can overcome a lot of those differences?
I have struggled with this my entire career. And tried to affect change where this is concerned. It's not easy. Listen, I don't have to tell you.
No.
You know it's not easy. But that doesn't mean we should stop doing it.
It doesn't.
You know.
But if most of the people are getting their direction from religious institutions, and then it starts with them. It starts there. So as clergy, how do we help our religious institutions to not be so divisive? I mean, I can tell you now, everybody's talking about the United Methodist Church, and it's split.
I know.
Right? Because, and I can tell you that I talked to different people in regards to the coming split. And it was, well, we couldn't agree on interpretation of Scripture. Because there's a new interpretation of Scripture.
I'm laughing. That's the history of religion. You know?
Exactly.
That's why. That's when religion becomes about power and control.
Have you ever heard Martin Luther King's sermon, "The Letter from Paul"?
Of course.
Oh, did he hit it right on the nail?
And then some.
And it's still today.
Of course.
And he said, America, you have over 200 different denominations.
That's right.
What's wrong with you? Sunday's the most segregated time in the world.
That's
What's
what he
wrong
said.
with
Sunday
you?
is the most segregated day of the week, and you know, do you if you baptize, do you sprinkle or do you dunk? You know,
Do you pour?
yeah, you know, and choose the faith system. It doesn't matter, all right?
I'm like, okay, so Paul and Silas, they was in the jail.
Yeah.
They went to the jailer's house. The jailer's house got saved, and the whole family was baptized. How?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does it matter?
Well.
And what matters was they were saved and they were baptized.
Yes.
That was the important part. That's why they didn't tell you how they were baptized. It's just that they were baptized.
That's correct.
That's what the important part was.
Yeah, and as I always tell my class, Scripture will give us details when it's important. And when those details, how or why, are not important, the text doesn't do that. It gets to the message it wants us to hear and wants us to learn.
Yep.
Anyway. Well, we still have a long road ahead of us.
We do.
There's still work to do. My hope is that there will be profound learning from this. I don't know, but I hope.
Yeah.
And that the whole notion of seeing the face of God in the person in front of you will ultimately be that text which motivates us and informs us.
Yeah.
Last comments, last thoughts?
My last thought is Jacob and Esau.
No.
As Jacob's coming back, Esau's coming with his army. He's coming with his family.
400.
And he's afraid of what's going to happen when he sees Esau. But he says that even though Esau is now in a sense the enemy, but when he saw Esau, he saw the face of God. He looked at his enemy's face and saw the face of God.
Yeah. And listen,
and they were brothers.
They were brothers, and he had every right to be afraid. What he wasn't a good guy. You know what he did. That's another sermon. But yes, that's exactly correct.
But he was able to see the face of God,
yeah.
and that was able to have some forgiveness between the two of them, and they were able to move on. Of course, they ended up separating again.
Yeah.
But there was time that they laid a foundation that, you know what, even though we got differences, we can still come together.
Yep.
We can still see God in one another.
And that's the greater message. And that's the profound challenge to get people to see above and beyond.
Indeed.
So, Easton, we've had the pleasure of having Reverend Leonard E. Palmer Sr. With us today at the Rabbis Roundtable to discuss not only cultural realities, but the tragedy in Buffalo and the heavy demands placed on us as citizens to help make the vision real as Americans and as children of God.
Indeed.
Reverend Palmer, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You'll come back to the Rabbis Roundtable.
And I hope you'll join us on the 20th.
I'll do my best. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Easton, we will see you next time on the Rabbis Roundtable.